All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for virtually joining our 8th annual Delaware River Watershed Forum. Today, you're in the Municipal Revenue Streams breakout session. My name is Kelly Knutson. I'm the State Policy Manager with the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. I just want to cover a couple housekeeping things before we dive into the main session. Just as a reminder, this session will be recorded and it will be posted online to our website early next week. That way, if you ever want to glance back and look at something that you missed or you want to forward it to your friends who couldn't be with us today, you certainly can do that. Now, you all have the capability to unmute yourself, but we do ask if you're not speaking to just put yourself on mute and direct any questions that you have in the chat box below. I also encourage, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties that I can assist you with, please let me know and I'll do my best remotely. Just as a reminder, since we can't be in person, it'd be great if folks can have their video on. It helps us to build that community and just communicate a little bit easier via Zoom in the platform. And then as a final reminder, the schedule for the rest of the forum can be found on sketch.com. We encourage folks to select which breakouts you want to attend, that we have a rough idea of who may be participating. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Leah at American Rivers. Thank you all again for joining.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm going to be kicking off this session just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover. I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are and why this topic is important. We'll cover an overview of municipal stormwater program funding sources. We'll talk a little bit about stormwater fees, and then we'll have a little bit for a panel discussion with our municipal representatives. And then we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session. So you can move to the next slide, Kelly. Thanks. Just to introduce everyone, we have, in addition to myself, we have 5 presenters today. Ellen Kohler with the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center, Susan Myerov from Pennsylvania Environmental Council, Renee Reber from PennFuture, and then we're really excited to be joined today by our municipal panelists, Jim Blanch, who is the Township Engineer from Whitpain Township, and Obi Lang, who's the Director of Public Works for Westchester Borough. So as we begin, I'd just like to ask all of our attendees to introduce yourselves in the chat by sharing your name and which organization you represent, if it's not already part of your Zoom name, and also which state you're representing today. All right, so next slide. As I think probably everyone here is well aware, unmanaged or undermanaged stormwater is one of the major stressors for our streams and our water systems here in the Delaware Basin. It leads to the type of problems that are pictured on this slide: flooding, stream bank erosion, water pollution, damage to pipes or culverts, and in some of our big cities, combined sewer systems that overflow during big storms. One of the reasons why stormwater problems have been so difficult to solve is that there's this huge need for work to be done, but the funding that's available at the federal and the state level falls really far short of what's needed. So what that means is that the funding and also the management responsibility for this type of work really falls to local governments, which can be a huge challenge. So this session is going to be about how local governments can access and leverage different sources of funding that are available or that can be created for stormwater management. We're going to use some specific Pennsylvania programs as examples, and our panelists are going to talk about how they've approached this problem in their towns. But a lot of what we're going to cover should also be pretty applicable, I think, to other states in the Delaware Basin. So next slide, please. Just to give some background and some regulatory context, I guess, for these programs, this is a map of Pennsylvania's stream impairments that are caused by stormwater. So if you know the state pretty well, you can see that the stormwater impairments are associated with urbanization in a lot of our big cities, and that a lot of it's concentrated in the Delaware Basin, and particularly in the southeast part of the state. So these urbanized areas are also where municipal stormwater is regulated through a federal permit program.
One thing, tomorrow we have a one
Slide.
I just remembered that I have an doctor's appointment, so it'll be much easier for me to just go to doctors and then go home and do a Zoom meeting. Are you open to that?
Well, were you planning on coming into the office?
I was
Everybody make sure to mute yourselves. We're hearing a phone call right now.
Unless we rescheduled our one-on-one to more like 11, I'm not going to be.
Can everyone check and see if you're on mute? We're hearing someone's private conversation. Thanks. Okay. Moving on. All right, so next slide, please, Kelly. Kelly, can you switch to the next slide? Thanks. All right, so the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or MS4 program, is a regulatory structure that assigns local responsibility for stormwater management and tells permit holders what they need to do to manage the stormwater that's from their community. It consists of 6 requirements that are called minimum control measures. These include rules for new development. So for example, that's the part that requires stormwater ordinances for developers. But it also includes requirements for things like managing public facilities, like maintenance yards and storm drains, among a number of other things. And then other states, so different states have different ways of implementing their MS4 permits and can have additional requirements. So in Pennsylvania, for example, there's a requirement for local governments to show that they're reducing pollution to impaired waters for areas that have already been developed. So not just for new development. And this is a fairly new part of Pennsylvania's MS4 program. Next slide. Depending on the state and the type of the permit, the costs for regulatory compliance to a local government can range from minimal to pretty significant. At the low end, a town's responsibility might just be reviewing development applications and submitting an annual report, or they might have to actually build new stormwater management systems to reduce pollution in order to meet their permit requirements. So on top of that base cost of permit compliance, bigger storms and aging pipes are creating new expenses. And these are usually they're such big expenses that they can't always be funded through the usual channels. So towns are looking for creative ways to fund this type of work. Next slide. Because these are such big investments, communities are increasingly looking to invest in stormwater projects that can maximize benefits to the community and also to the natural landscape. One of the biggest challenges, I think, of funding stormwater programs is figuring out how to align and also how to time the different funding sources in a way that reflects the very unique needs of each community. Having a broader vision for how these systems can serve multiple purposes is really important to being able to leverage funding from different sources. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ellen now to talk about some of the different potential sources of funding that are available for stormwater management.
Great, thank you so much, Leah. So with that background in mind, we're going to turn to how municipalities can fund stormwater programs. I'm going to provide a basic overview of revenue sources, a variety of revenue sources, except for stormwater fees. Sue Myerov is going to cover stormwater fees. So within any municipal budget, there are multiple revenue streams that could be used for stormwater management. And it's important to remember that those funds could be managed by different people in different departments. So you could be looking at a municipality that is using general funds or bond revenues or revenue from grants, loans, municipal fees other than stormwater fees, and doing some of their work through partnerships and collaborations. But that money might be managed by, some of it might be managed by the Public Works Department, some of it might be managed by planning. So the stormwater program manager, who often wears more than one hat in a municipality, has to figure out how to connect the dots between the revenue sources and the municipal departments that are managing that money and what the stormwater program needs to get done. Next slide, please. So again, we're sort of using Pennsylvania as our lens here, and we need to remember that Pennsylvania has township-based government. So if we look at the recent pollution reduction plans for Pennsylvania and the municipalities in their MS4 permits, these are the most common sources of funding that I've seen in those PRP plans. General funds, grants, and partnerships and collaborations. If we look at general funds, each municipality has its own sort of collection of taxes. So one municipality might have higher property taxes than its neighbor, another might have higher earned income tax. So that combination is unique to each municipality. With respect to grants, all of the municipalities in their PRPs said that they were going to seek out grant funding, which is great, except that there's not enough Growing Greener funding through the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to fund everybody's PRP work. So one of the things that we can do is help our communities find other sources of grant funding. For example, in Pennsylvania, there are community development grants that help fund urban revitalization. There's also one of my favorite Pennsylvania programs, the Dirt and Gravel Road Low Volume Road Program. That funds 50% of project costs. Each conservation district has these dollars to spend in their county. And so that can be and what I want to emphasize here is that low volume roads means the number of vehicles using that roads. And it also applies to road stream crossings. So that doesn't this could apply in your MS4 area. A lot of municipalities also mentioned partnerships and collaborations in their PRP plans. Those partnerships could be internal, like the Public Works Department working with the Parks and Rec Department to implement BMPs, but they can also be external, whether partnering with and collaborating with watershed groups on education, and maybe even with schools and churches in terms of locating BMPs on their sites. Next slide, please. This is just an example from New Garden Township in Chester County of how grant funding can help support a municipality in achieving its stormwater program goals. So this is a riparian buffer project in a township park. The total costs of the project are about $70,000. And as you can see, the township is only contributing 4% of the project costs. So there's grant funding, there's partner funding, in-kind match. I do want to note, though, that the township is also committing to cover operations and maintenance. That's what O&M means. This can often be a big challenge because it sounds like, oh yeah, sure, we'll do the operations and maintenance, but doing the operations and maintenance properly so that you are maintaining the water quality benefits of that BMP is really important. And that usually requires training township staff on how to maintain that BMP. Often that training doesn't happen. And unfortunately, our record, the municipal record in terms of O&M for these stormwater BMPs is not incredibly strong. So that's something that we could be supporting townships on as well. Next slide, please. These sources are less common in the PRPs in Pennsylvania. The first two, municipal revenue bonds and loans, do require that a municipality is comfortable with debt financing. So a lot of the municipalities, particularly smaller municipalities, probably are not, and so they're not looking at those kinds of opportunities. In addition, there can be some hurdles to accessing the bond market. There are upfront costs. You have to have a good rating as a municipality to be able to attract investors, so that can also be a deterrent. PennVest is the Pennsylvania Clean Water Act State Revolving Fund manager. They do provide grants for some communities that are under-resourced, but the majority of municipalities will only be able to access loan funds. Those loan funds, though, are very, very low interest rates. And so it's a very attractive, if you are willing to go into debt financing, it's a very attractive source for those loans. Some other revenue sources can include, like Pennsylvania has liquid fuels tax dollars that go to townships. Those funds come from the state, and they're calculated based on road miles managed by the township and population. It can be as little as a couple $1,000s to as much as $500,000 for some municipalities. And I do want to, and there can be other small sources of funding, maybe from, for example, street tree regulations, or even from a utility needing to, doing some work and then paying the township to do the resurfacing after that work is done. I do want to note that even though there may be small sources of funding, of revenue, they can sometimes be really important if they're unrestricted. Unrestricted funds can be catalytic in getting some work done that isn't covered by some other revenue source that's really important to completing an element of the project planning or development or permitting. Next slide, please. So this one is an example of a PENNVEST project, a recent PENNVEST project, stormwater project. There aren't all that many examples of stormwater projects that PENNVEST has funded through loan funding or even grant funding within the Delaware River Basin, but this is a place where PENNVEST really wants to be working. They really want to be helping municipalities figure out how to use PENNVEST dollars to achieve their stormwater goals. So this example is in Ridley Township, obviously. It's a $2.3 million loan that was, the package was completed last year in 2019. The project includes a mix of gray and green elements. So there's an infiltration basin, there's a bioswale, it's in Darby Creek Watershed that flows to the Delaware. And the focus is improving an existing stormwater system that serves 11,000 households. And I do want to note that Ridley Township does not have a stormwater fee. So you can find these projects if you go to the PENNVEST website and you look at the resources, you can find projects and you can find ones that are specifically about stormwater on their website. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, and it's just sort of a comparison chart of various different kinds of funding sources, what they cover in terms of whether they cover capital expenses or operations and maintenance, and their strengths and weaknesses. I'm not going to read through the entire chart, but I am going to make a couple of different notes. You're going to have access to these slides later, so you'll have access to this chart if you want to look at it in more detail. But two notes I want to make is you could probably add planning into the column for O&M. And generally, grants and loans and bond financing don't cover the costs that come along with project planning. So that can be challenging in terms of helping a municipality move forward with a stormwater program if they don't have funding in place to pay for the planning part of the project. In addition, I do want to note that general fund dollars sometimes are seen as being a less equitable way of funding stormwater, because you can have a large landowner, for example, maybe who may not be paying significantly large property taxes, for example, if that's part of how they generate general funds, but is generating a lot of stormwater. So that's one thing to keep in mind in terms of how your stormwater program, how your municipality is funding its stormwater program, and who's bearing the costs of implementing the program. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, and she's going to talk now about stormwater fees.
Thanks, Ellen. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, as Ellen has just mentioned, there's just multiple sources for our municipalities to fund their stormwater programs and provide different streams of revenue. I'm going to focus, Kelly, can you just hit enter? Just thank you. I'm going to focus on fees this morning. Just a quick deep dive into fees, primarily because they're an option that has been growing in popularity among municipalities in Pennsylvania. And it also, as noted in that chart that Ellen just showed, does require some significant stakeholder and public dialogue. So it provides this sort of opening and opportunity for organizations, watershed organizations, nonprofits, environmental groups, other stakeholders to become sort of engaged in that process to help develop the fee program. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? So, oh, right, I was going to mention that we are growing in popularity in Pennsylvania, and you'll see in a chart shortly that over 60 municipalities have fee programs in the state right now. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives you a couple of reasons why a municipality may want to consider stormwater fees. There's, again, multiple options for them to supplement their funding. One of the reasons that this is becoming a little more popular, I believe, is because it's the fee is directly tied to the generation of stormwater. It applies across all of the properties in a particular municipality, and it's based on these sort of actual costs and revenues, and it provides this really predictable stream of funding for parts of the stormwater program. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we try to monitor the growth of stormwater fee programs in Pennsylvania, and also do some research on case studies that we can share, and we'll be hearing from Mr. Lang this morning from Westchester, who this borough has a very robust stormwater fee program. But this just kind of shows you the growth of stormwater fee programs in the state, and you can see they're picking up in popularity from this chart. We've calculated now that about 68 municipalities are actually involved in a fee program. This chart shows 29 because we're kind of including all the regional programs that have multiple municipalities working together. And I think the next slide we're going to show where these are located in the state of Pennsylvania. And as you can see, it's in sections. It's certainly not widespread. We have 2,500 local municipalities in our state, but we are seeing, again, this sort of increase in the popularity of stormwater fee programs. And it's great because they're all a little bit different. They have different techniques. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides, but I did want to give you this overview. This is based on some research that we do across the state, and also we look at something called the Western Kentucky University study on stormwater and utility programs around the state to give us some more robust information. Okay, next slide, please. So what about the basin? So this slide just gives you a quick overview of the fee programs that we've been able to identify throughout the Delaware River Basin. And you can see it's not quite as widespread. We do know, again, that there's 6 in our region in the basin in Pennsylvania. There are 4 programs that we're aware of in Delaware. None so far in New Jersey. However, that state has just recently enabled the stormwater fees and authorities in that state. New York, there are none in the basin that we could find, and only one, I believe, the entire state, which I believe was up in Ithaca. So let me move on to the next slide to give you some more of an overview of how these states enable the ability for their municipalities to charge fees. Pennsylvania, we have the Municipal Authorities Act, which enabled the Stormwater Authority to have a stormwater authority, and then it was further amended to allow fees for stormwater. And then there was an enabling of our second-class townships to directly implement a fee program. There's some nuances in Pennsylvania's municipal authorities law. So home rule communities, such as Philadelphia, can also implement fees directly. In other communities, the fee can only be enabled through first forming a municipal authority. Moving to New Jersey, we know that there's been some new legislation to enable these partnerships or counties to issue fees. New York, we just saw that they're not prohibited or clearly authorized, and again, we only found a few examples in the state, and there are definitely different entities that can charge stormwater fees. So again, this is an option that is available to most states. We're seeing here in Pennsylvania that it's starting to grow in popularity. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the fee types, but I'm not going to get into too much detail. I do want to mention at the end of our presentation, we'll be providing some links to some additional information. One is a stormwater fee guide that my organization, PEC, developed, and it sort of goes into detail about all these fees, how these fees are calculated using these different types. I think it's interesting that each of these are developed, and by really looking at very individual characteristics of each community. That's what's kind of nice about a stormwater fee program. It's really based on your characteristics. And so the most common is called the equivalent residential unit, or EDU. And it's based on basically impervious cover. So if you pay, you pay. All fee systems in Pennsylvania do require a credit as well. And when you're developing programs, of course, we also like to consider many different things in terms of these fee types. And if we can just move on to the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about consideration. So you saw that there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can develop these fees. But really very common to development of a fee program is that you can look at lots of different considerations. Some fee types, again, just impervious care. Others will look at the types of housing and community characteristics present in a particular municipality. It'll look at the pervious or versus impervious cover. That is, how will that factor into your fee determination? There are some that are more scientific and look at hydrology and soils. But I think also I want to stress that the considerations that need to be implemented for a fee program, a successful fee program, really do involve community character, understanding your community's characters and their preferences, having a really robust stakeholder outreach, making sure that you are talking to the folks that will be subject to this fee and having them understand the value and the benefits, looking at your political sort of situation as well. And of course, as Ellen had reviewed, and Leah had started us off with this framing, is understanding your goals and objectives and what you would want this fee to cover, what aspect of your stormwater program. So these are really important considerations when you are developing a fee. And you're going to hear from Mr. Lang from Westchester Borough about how this process sort of worked in Westchester. And I believe, Kelly, if you could just go to the next slide. This is actually from Westchester Borough. Again, they chose to use a residential tier system, and I'm sure Mr. Lang will talk a little bit more about this. But this was a way for them to look at their community character, the types of housing units, and to make sure that they were equitably assigning this fee and not be having this sort of disproportionately be impacting smaller communities or smaller residential areas. So this is a pretty attractive way, this residential tier system. So in addition to Westchester Borough, Radnor, and Lancaster also use this particular system. So again, this is just a quick overview of the fee programs in Pennsylvania and the various ways that you can implement it. And what we'd really like to do right now is transition to our hearing from our municipal panelists. And I'm going to transition to Renee to introduce our panelists this morning, and then we can have a discussion about how our municipalities are financing their stormwater programs.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, and Kelly put it in the chat, but I'd like to remind folks to please mute yourself if you're not speaking or picking up some background noise. Thank you. And also I'd like to thank Leah and Ellen and Susan for providing that super informative, helpful background information on stormwater management, why it's important, and the various types of fundings that are available out there. But yeah, of course, now we're going to hear from two municipal representatives today to talk about stormwater management in their communities and the ways that they're funding, and have a bit of discussion on how groups like ourselves can help stormwater management, help with the funding, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. So yeah, please put your questions in the chat. So today we have Jim Blanch from Whitpain Township. He's the township engineer. Jim is a registered professional engineer who joined Whitpain Township in 1998 and currently serves as their township engineer. He is responsible for developing and managing the township's MS4 permit, the TMDL, and the pollutant reduction, oh my gosh, it's PRPs programs, including drafting and obtaining regulatory approvals for the township's Wissahickon Creek Watershed Sediment TMDL strategy and implementation plan. He is an active member on the Wissahickon Clean Water Partnership Implementation Committee and has served as a panelist at numerous stormwater conferences over the past 20 years. And Whitpain Township has been a recipient of the Greater Valley Forge Transportation Management Award, Sustainability Award for the past 6 years, and received the Platinum Award in 2019. We'll also be hearing from Obi Lang, who is the Director of Public Works in Westchester Borough. Mr. Lang was appointed to the Director of Public Works for the borough in 2013 after serving as the Deputy Director for 22 years. His expansive career path is principally within the sphere of public works operation and maintenance. Prior to joining the borough, he was employed as a contract officer by the Bahamian government, where he was assigned to a myriad of World Bank financed public work infrastructural projects throughout the Commonwealth. Mr. Lang matriculated at the Colleges of Arts and Sciences and Technology and began his career with the United Kingdom-based multidiscipline firm of Howard Humphreys and Sons Consulting Engineers for the Jamaican government. So first, I'd like to, and Kelly, you can advance to the next slide, turn it over to Whitpain first, and then we'll hear from Mr. Lang. But first, I'd like to ask our panelists to provide some background information on your municipality, especially as it relates to stormwater. And also please discuss how, of course, the heart of today's discussion, how you're funding your stormwater management programs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Renee. Today, I'd just like to discuss briefly about our township, as far as we are located in central Montgomery County, outside Philadelphia. We have about 19,000 residents. We're a little under 13 square miles in size, with over 7,000 households. The primary watersheds in our township are the Wissahickon Creek and the Stony Creek. We do have portions of the Plymouth Creek also in our township, but it's a smaller portion. Our major land uses are residential and commercial office. We do have some retail along our corridors. Skippack Pike and DeKalb Pike are the two major corridors that go through the township. And we do have one major institution, the Montgomery County Community College Bluebell campus is located within our township. Over the last 25 years or so, the township has been able to preserve about 400 acres of open space through our parks, as well as preserved open space available to the public that's actually owned by the township. And we also have preserved about 200 acres of private open space through partnerships with watershed groups, conservation groups, as well as private property owners. We feel that obviously being proactive with open space limits some of our stormwater management challenges going forward. So the more we can preserve, and that's over 600 acres, the less runoff and impervious surfaces that can be added. So we feel it's a win-win to be proactive on open space. So that it's an important part of our overall strategy to limiting stormwater management. The township stormwater system is comprised of about 120 detention basins with about 6,000 inlets and outfalls and over 60 miles of stormwater pipes. So you can see that there's, even for a 13 square mile township, that's quite a bit of stormwater infrastructure. It's not all maintained by the township. Some of it's privately maintained, some of it's maintained by HOAs, some of it's maintained by the state and the county as well. But that's a sizable amount of stormwater infrastructure that has to be maintained. The township has prioritized over the past 10 years upgrading as much of the stormwater infrastructure as we can. We are regulated as MS4, so we are subject to the MS4 permit. So our infrastructure, we've looked at all of our basins, which I mentioned earlier, there's about 120 basins. About 10% of those are actually maintained by the township. So we only maintain about 15 of those basins out of the 120. The rest are privately maintained or owned by HOAs or businesses, and they're required to maintain them each storm event. So as part of those basins, we are looking to partner with HOAs and private property owners to see if we can help them in upgrading their basins, retrofitting them. Some of the basins are 30, 40 years old before any kind of current stormwater technologies were put in place. And obviously our ordinances have been updated over the years. And a lot of these basins were built in prior regulatory environments. So as part of our infrastructure, we're always looking at how can we improve things with our stormwater infrastructure. So we have a bridge replacement project we're currently working on. We're looking to actually build stormwater detention as part of that bridge replacement. So we can add, it's in an area that has no stormwater detention now. The neighborhood was built in the 1950s. So we're looking at ways we can add infrastructure at the same time we're upgrading our bridge So we can kind of use our money twofold and try to, get as much benefit for the tax dollar when we upgrade infrastructure. Townships upgraded in the past couple of years about 5 basins. We're right now going out on RFP to do 5 more retrofits. We also just went into one of our township parks and put in bioswales and rain gardens and a small woodland preservation area. So we're trying to do as much as we can in our publicly owned lands with the money that we have available. We also built a new park back in 2014. And as part of that park, it was an athletic field complex with walking trails, with some preserved open space, with meadows. But we added in a capture reuse system where we capture the runoff on storm events into underground cisterns. And then we use an irrigation system to pump the gray water out of the cisterns and irrigate the fields. So we felt that was a cutting edge design. We also added in detention basins and rain gardens and bioswales as part of that project. So we're doing things like that to try to upgrade our stormwater infrastructure as we go in and do improvements throughout the township. The other thing, we have looked at our parks and looked to reduce our maintenance costs and improve water quality. We've allowed a lot of our passive open space to go to meadow, which obviously reduces runoff and improves water quality. Large areas of our open space, we've allowed that to occur. So that's also a way we save on maintenance money, but at the same time, look to improve our stormwater management. The township also revised our stormwater ordinance back in 2003 to start looking at permitting small residential projects to try to help slow down some of the impervious creep that we see, the additional impervious being built on a driveway or on a building addition or even a backyard pool. So we actually added a fee structure as part of that permitting where we could collect a stormwater fee or require stormwater management. And that's helped us over the years collect some funding for our stormwater system. We are also requiring different homeowners to add the stormwater fee to additional impervious when they add driveways and sheds and things like that. So we're trying to use that fee to leverage other funding. Back in 2010, we actually leveraged some of our stormwater funding through the Growing Greener grant program. And this slide shows some of the funding sources that we have. We used the stormwater fee as well as capital reserve funds to leverage that Growing Greener grant, which we then went in and retrofitted to detention basins. We also have utilized Montgomery County Tree Vitalize money for tree plantings within the basins or along the basin berms. So basically, our funding mechanisms are up on the screen now. We have a primary funding for our stormwater program is our capital reserve fund. We do not have a stormwater fee that covers the entire township. The capital reserve fund is a 5-year fund. We basically planned every 5 years our capital reserve projects, and we slide money into that capital reserve fund from the general fund. So technically, it's a general fund. The funding comes from our property tax and EIT tax base. So that provides $350,000 to $400,000 annually, and is the bulk of our revenue for our stormwater improvement projects. We do have 2 smaller fees. Like I said, the stormwater outfall fee and the fee in lieu of fund, they add about $30,000 annually to our account. And they are, I would say, are considered impact fees. So they try to capture anybody building new things within the township, whether it's a developer building homes, that's the storm sewer outfall fee, or the small residential applicant. And we are required by those fees to look at the entire township when it comes to equity. We don't put all the funding in one area or the other. It's required to be put back in the watershed where the fees are gathered. So so there is an equitable way we then take that plan to install the improvements within the township. The other item on this slide, I just want to make note of, is it shows we have been proactive with open space Just last month, we floated a bond to purchase Mermaid Lake, which is an old open space parcel that had a swim club on it with a barn pavilion and a par 3 golf course. We purchased it for $8.3 million, and it's about 63 acres. The township is right now in the process of trying to open some of it back to the public once we just make sure everything's safe. With walking trails, we're going to add meadows within the walking trail areas, and then the swim club, we're investigating whether that would stay or would be removed. So we've been looking at it from an environmental standpoint. There's a pond on the site. We're looking at potential environmental improvements to the pond, whether we, obviously add riparian improvements to it, as well as we're looking at additional stormwater detention and bioswales and rain gardens. So we're looking at a lot of different ways to improve the function, environmental function of that parcel. At the same time, it was going to be looked at, it was being considered or looked at by a developer to put 55 homes in there. So we've now preserved it, and those homes won't be constructed on that property. So the township's been proactive with open space, and I think it goes hand in hand with stormwater management to try to make sure we can manage our infrastructure and our stormwater management facilities so that we don't have issues going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, and Kelly can advance to the next slide. So yeah, I'll turn it over to O.B. Lang in Westchester to talk about stormwater management in his community. O.B., it's all you.
Are you hearing me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great.
Good morning.
Fine, good morning to everybody. Thank you. If my voice happened to fade out, just let me know. But I try my best to keep it at a level that you can hear me. Well, yes, thanks for asking me to give a synopsis of what we're doing here in Westchester with regards to the stream protection fee. Before I get into that, let me say that, as you know, Westchester is a political subdivision that was incorporated in 1799. It's a very unique community. And as I always say, that Westchester itself it's really a microcosm of any old, large city. And the demographic, it's typical. So it is no way comparable to a township. It's just uniquely different. So the services and the kind of issues that we have here in Westchester, it's completely different from the usual township. So let me say that on top of it being an old town, we have to maintain the town infrastructure, specifically storm water management facilities, to accommodate approximately 17,000 students at Westchester University. It's a county seat. And you can imagine the number of working individuals who navigate the borough in any single day. So don't be fooled by the 20,000 population in any given day. That could be tripled in terms of commuting and other institution. Well, a little history of our stormwater facility is that it was constructed way back in the 1920s. And it's mostly VCP terracotta material. And the larger pipes from 24 to 36 inches, they are all brick pipes. So obviously, it's easily understood that the system has outlived its days. We have experienced a lot of failure, and it got to the point where we find ourselves being reactive rather than proactive with maintenance. I'm pointing out this specific occurrence because with all this strain on our maintenance of our storm water system, there comes the mandate by the DEP with the MS4 and the NPDS. So we knew from day one that there is no possible way that we could go ahead maintaining this system and meet our regulatory obligations by doing things the old-fashioned way. In this system, we have approximately 1,000 storm inlets, 160 manholes. And again, let me point out that the 160 manholes may be just a third of the access that we need. Most of the pipeline system, we don't have access for maintenance inspection. We have 22 miles of pipe network and 60 outfalls. And we have identified approximately 12 low-lying areas. That's always accounted for flooding, especially whenever we experience 100-year storm. Our overall program is managed by the Public Works Department, except for billing and other related administrative function. We kind of more or less isolate or divide our engineering consultants into two divisions. One set of consultants mainly service or private development needs and respond to MS4 design compliance for new development. The other consultant mainly deals strictly with MS4 tasks, inclusive of annual report for MCM permit cycles, TMDL, strategic planning, PRPs, and other relevant investigation like IDDE. I will move on to the fact that we were faced with all this financial burden. In 2017, the Borough of Westchester implemented a stream protection fee. The stream protection fee is a schedule of stormwater rate based on borough's cost of providing stormwater services to its residents, and more importantly, to provide adequate, sustainable funding source for all operational services, which is required by EPA regulations for compliance with the Clean Water Act. With strict adherence with Borough of Westchester guidelines, the stream protection fee can only be used to fund services that directly support MS4 TMDL permit requirements and stormwater operations as allowed by the DEP. Examples of these services funded by the stream protection fee include, but are not limited to, the following: MS4 permitting compliance, drainage and infrastructure maintenance, street sweeping, tree planting, creeks channel maintenance and restoration, and stormwater management capital expenditures. The billing structure adopted for the stream protection fee was by using an impervious coverage approach. In addition, the borough also includes rebate, credit, incentive for property owners, and a tier system was adopted to preserve equitability. The borough also offers reduction in fees to property owners who operate and maintain a best management practice consistent to approve requirements of the DEP for the MS4 TMDL regulations. The current impervious coverage fee was projected to support annually with the projected 6.7 to 1,000 stream protection fee. That's the base rate rather. And it's estimated to generate 1.3 million each year. Number of the stream protection fee was implemented in 2017. But what we did, we actually procured $1.4 million seed money through bond, because we knew that before collecting this stream protection fee, we will need to get off the ground running with these projects to meet our 5/10 years obligation. So what we did is that we used that as seed money, and as soon as the money started coming in from the stream protection fee, we used that to pay down on the bond. Some of the capital improvement projects that we were able to accomplish just within an 18-month period was the Pine Alley storm sewer, the Hoops Alley porous pavement, Barnett Street culvert replacement, and a number of green infrastructures. Total $1.6 million. Operation costs, that is in-house employee hours for inspection and other maintenance services, total a little over $51,000. So that total operating and capital costs for that 18 months period was approximately $1.7 million. That's a far cry from what we were accustomed to, which it's safe to say without much exaggeration, doing nothing, because stormwater cannot be sustained through general fund, especially in Westchester, where we have actually built out, and our tax base shows so it's basically stagnant. For your information, I think it's about 40% of the real estate in Westchester are tax-free, non-exempt. So it was really a challenge for us to establish this stream protection fee, bearing in mind that we have to make certain that we have some kind of equity in the system, and at the same, and also to draw the line between a service fee rather than a tax. Also, although until this day, we cannot get over the fact that people still refer to it as a tax. In some instances, they still call it the rain tax. However, we are really making a lot of success, and it can be shown in around the borough. So we are very excited about it, And it's no stopping us now in meeting our obligatory requirements for the commitment to the Stream Water, the Clean Water Act, and at the same time make certain, this is very important, that all the residents and stakeholders in the borough, we pay special attention to their immediate needs. Don't care how localized the issue might be. And I conclude at that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blanch and Mr. Lang. There was a truck outside, so hopefully my dogs are done barking. I apologize if they start barking again. Yeah, we're at time. Kelly did let me know that we can run over. I'm not sure if Jim and OB can stay on with us or not. I'm sure there's been lots of questions in the chat. Perhaps some of our presenters can stay on if you're unavailable. With the tiny bit of time remaining, you know, how can groups, how can watershed organizations, advocacy organizations, conservation organizations help you all with the funding components of the stormwater management, whether it's advocating and providing support for a fee or some other ways that groups like ourselves might be of assistance and create some partnerships there?
May I?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I was looking forward to that question because this is something that I've struggled with from the inception of this TMDL. And my point is this. The fact that stormwater qualities are based on condition within watersheds and not necessarily political boundaries. Understandable. It's difficult to measure each individual municipality contribution to stream degradation. Thus, it's just as difficult to assign individual responsibility for pollution removal. This is still a major hurdle in local government acceptance to the TMDL regulations. This means municipality will have to spend significant sum of money for regulatory compliance with an undefined assessment of results. It is therefore behooves all municipalities to approach this issue collectively rather than individually. And this is where I target directly to your answer. That's where these groups can position themselves to be a facilitator through a consortium approach.
I guess I would just add on the watershed group side, we have engaged our local watershed group, Wissahickon Valley Watershed Association. It's now called Wissahickon Trails. We've used them over the past 10 years when we go out for grants. They provide support letters. They've been very proactive in understanding our stormwater challenges and trying to help. And obviously they have been out acquiring open space and placing conservation easements on private open space over the past 10 years. So they're a very proactive watershed group. We also added them on our comprehensive recreation plan update, which we're working on right now, which is looking at our open space and our parks, including Mermaid Lake, which I mentioned earlier. That is, we're looking at how to preserve that the best way. So the Wissahickon Trails watershed group has been an excellent partner for us, and we've included them as much as we can in our projects from as early on as possible. We also promote a lot of our projects through our electronic newsletter, weekly electronic newsletter, as well as our website. And we do have publicized different workshops through that as well. So we've tried to get the message out, and we've tried to work with our watershed groups, and I think we've been very successful.
Yeah, and that being said, just to segue into that, is that let me say that the CRC and the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance, yes, we have coordinated on a number of occasions and effort. But I'm looking at the bigger picture as it applies to your specific question. And I firmly believe that if we can get municipalities, adjacent municipality along, take for example, Goose Creek. If we can get municipality along the reach of Goose Creek or along the reach of Plum Run, wherever it might be, especially where you have your allocation, and make a collective effort, it's much better and more economical for each municipality trying to do something without no gauge of even realizing or measuring your accomplishment.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have been advocating for that for a while, and so it's nice to hear somebody from the municipal side saying the same exact thing, you know, I think that helps to give us a lot of strength to continue advocating for that. So thank you for that, OB. Leah, were you collecting questions, or Kelly?
We've been answering some of the questions in the chat. I think there's one or two that we didn't get to if we have time.
Go for it.
Go for it, okay. So from Krista Scherer, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, wants to know, how do you show your residents the importance of the services they're getting from their fee dollars? This is directed at Jim and OB, I believe.
Go ahead.
I didn't hear the question clearly.
Sorry, how do you show your residents the importance of the services they're getting from their stormwater fee dollars?
Oh, okay.
I could take this first. We use a lot of our electronic media, social media, to try to let people know when we're working on a project, planning a project, what type of project we're looking at, where it is in our watersheds, and obviously what the impacts and the pros and the benefits of the project are. We also meet with all the residents in the community where that improvement's going in. So if it's in a neighborhood, we'll have a public meeting and just invite everybody in to look at the plans and be aware of what we're up to. We also have our electronic newsletter, goes out every week, and we put things in there regarding our stormwater system and important public educational things, obviously as part of our MS4 program too, but you know, to keep inlets clear. We obviously had 2 tropical systems over the past couple months that were pretty rough on our infrastructure. So making sure that you're looking at your inlet, making sure there's no leaves or debris around it when that storm hits. So we do things like that, but yeah, we try to keep the public involved as much as possible. Obviously, when we're doing planning for our budget, we present on our potential projects in our budget meetings. So, and our budget meetings are put, our PowerPoints, everything are put on our website. So we try to get as much information out to the public as possible.
Yes, and if I may add, the borough's comprehensive plan drives every capital improvements within the borough. And in addition, the Public Works Department, every 5 years, we have to update our 5-year capital improvement plan. So everything that we do is reflected in our 5-year plan. And again, it has to be presented through council annually as a capital improvement for that respective budget year. All information at all times available on the borough's website. However, let me say that we did a very, very comprehensive public outreach during this whole process. We had credit workshop, educate the property owners how they can go about the credit program. We also establish a credit manual, step by step, how they can go about doing things within their home so that they can reach out to us for credit. The Sustainability Committee has actually planned workshop focusing mainly on rain gardens, enlightening the committee how they can do the rain gardens. And we try to do it in a way that they don't have to solicit the services of engineers. And we are always there to guide them and answer their question. So it's out there, and we make ourselves available in that regard. And let me add that we have constructed about 11 rain gardens in the community. And every one of these projects was vetted by the residents within the community before we even complete the design. They play a part into it. We review the designs, everything, and go through the whole process in terms of public outreach with those residents. So yes, they are involved.
Thanks so much, OB and Jim. That's all really good to hear. We're getting a little over time. Do we have time for one more question, Kelly, or should we?
Yeah, there's no current session right now. So as long as folks are willing to stay on, we can answer questions.
All right, I've got a question here from Liz Feinberg. Wants to know, are there stormwater fee waiver options or sliding scale options for economically disadvantaged residents or property owners? And is that question, I guess, or is that concept relevant to your communities? This is for Jim and OB again.
Well, I would just say for our township, we don't actually have an ordinance with a fee for the entire township like Westchester Borough has. So we don't have that set up that way. We basically fund our stormwater projects through our capital reserve. So we don't really have a waiver process set up. We do have obviously the impact fee, stormwater fee for impacts when you're doing a building permit project. There we don't have a waiver set up for that type of improvement, but in general, that person's putting in a building addition or a driveway or a pool or something that's adding impervious surface. So there's cost involved with their permit. So they've just got to factor that in, but we don't have any kind of waiver set up for that type fee.
Yeah, and from the borrower's perspective, we don't have waivers of such, but if I like to be specific about the jargon, what we have is an appeal system where any residents can appeal their impervious area, and we have had several appeals. And we go back to these residents and listen to them, walk the property, observe the property, and most often we make adjustment to their initial fees. And let me add is that we have a 6-tier system, and we try to make it, again, as I indicated earlier on, as equitable as possible.
Great, thank you. Here's another question from Madge Monser. Wants to know, how did you determine everyone's initial impervious coverage? I don't know if that was a mapping exercise or how that was done. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
For Whitpain Township, we have, the first thing we did early on was invest in ArcGIS. So we use our GIS system quite a bit for stormwater management. So as part of that, we have an idea of the impervious surfaces on the entire township. So we know for an individual property owner what their impervious surface is. And when I mentioned that fee that's associated with our permitting process, that fee is set based on the amount of impervious surface you're adding and it's based on the size of the lot, the size of the parcel. So we use GIS to determine our impervious surfaces, and then from that we use that for planning our stormwater infrastructure.
And here in Westchester, we also use the ARC GIS mapping, but we also cross-check and try to more or less overlay the best possible way we can with the county's tax map. And that's the way we calculate our impervious area, which I think it serves us well, because we have been possibly maybe 98% accurate with our results.
Great, thank you. I think we have one more question. This is about PennVest. Probably Ellen could answer this the best. Kate Hudemeyer says, I appreciate the hint that PennVest's interest in stormwater projects is growing. I assume that's really only through their loan programs and not through any of their limited grant dollars. I don't know if you know the answer to that, Ellen.
So Kate, I think you're basically, that's accurate. I mean, the communities access PennVest dollars based on their individual financial capacity. So if a particular municipality is under-resourced, they will qualify for grants. If they are, adequately resourced, they will only be able to access loan dollars. But what's interesting to me though, is if you look on the PennVest site and you sort of filter for stormwater projects, a lot of those stormwater projects that come up are funded with grants. So, but they're also older. They're, sort of more about 10 years old. So there is a mix that has happened within the Delaware River Basin in terms of PennVest projects being funded by both grants and loans. But Kate, you're right that most of what we'll see for communities in the Delaware River Basin, majority of communities will be looking at only being able to qualify for a loan.
And may I?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and on that subject of funding, we have procured grant through the Conservation District on dirt and gravel road, but I would prefer to make it use a more friendly term and refer to it as the environmentally sensitive maintenance, because incidentally, that's where you're qualified for this loan. You're eligible for this loan. And let me add, for the sake of the listeners, for you to be eligible for the Conservation District loan, somebody from your organization has to be certified. They have to make certain that they have their certification, which is offered through the Penn State Engineering Department, before you can even attempt to apply for this. We have also gotten grants through the CRP, the CDBG, and liquid fuels, which you have to be very, very careful with that, because you can only do that if the stormwater improvement is incidental to the road surfacing, and of course the stream protection fee. But let me say though that you got to be creative, because with some of these grant funding, we end up getting the entire project without putting up a penny. You can leverage, and with one good thing about the Conservation District grant is that we can also match in kind. So because we are a public works department, that's where our match comes from. Or employees do things to fill that requirements.
Great, thank you. So a couple more questions came in as you were answering this last one, but I promised to be the last. So Jim and Obi, if you're still available to stay on. We've got a question from Lucia Ruggiero, wants to know if you can talk a little bit about the most effective strategies for addressing the concerns of businesses and taxpayers before implementing your fee programs, and what that outreach process was like, I guess.
Very, very good question. I can attest to that. that if you inform the public outreach, and be honest with them, nobody wants to pay anything extra. But instead of delving on the fact they have to pay, and again, a lot of them call it tax, make certain you emphasize the benefits, and not only the benefits from the environment, safeguarding the environment on a whole, but you have to break it down to their individual benefit. And what we have been doing here in Westchester, we have spent a lot of time, a lot of money from the stream protection fee addressing residents' localized problems, stormwater problems. But again, public outreach, public outreach, public outreach.
I'll just add to that. Westchester did a great job of that. And the programs that we see that have been the most successful, where they aren't being challenged and regularly sort of denigrated, shall we say, in local newspapers, are the programs that were very effective in initially going out, bringing in business interests to be part of that stakeholder group, to talk about the program, and to be part of the problem solvers that then propose the fee and the fee structure. So those are those are really some of the best practices. Westchester did a great job. Derry Township and the Chesapeake did a great job. There's some examples of programs that have done, fee programs that have been based on that extensive, thorough, and effective public outreach.
Thanks. Thank you very much for helping me out here, because I wouldn't have. I wish I was that specific. But initially, this was our approach. We identify stakeholders from every possible sector within Westchester: the hospital, the university, the landlord association, the chamber of commerce, the churches, every sector of the community. And they were the advisory. They made up the advisory committee. They were the ones who will labor day and night to come up with an equitable rate. So that's very important.
That makes so much sense. Thanks, Obi and Alan, for those answers. I think, let's see, we do have one more question here from Liz Feinberg. I think this is really for Obi. Maybe Jim can answer this a little bit, but are your stormwater fee revenues, or I guess other program revenues, ever used outside your jurisdiction to mitigate runoff entering from outside your municipal boundaries?
From our perspective, no, not outside of the municipal boundary, but it's being utilized at a point where the municipality downstream gets significant benefit from the project.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that we have as part of a TMDL that is being studied, we've initiated the Wissahickon Clean Water Partnership. I know Alan's part of it. It's basically 16 townships and boroughs, including the city of Philadelphia, as well as folks from the University of Maryland, Temple's Center for Sustainable Communities, Wissahickon Trails, and the Montgomery County Planning Commission, as well as the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. We're trying to bring a whole coalition partnership together to look at the Wissahickon watershed and look at ways to do improvements and BMPs within it, and see, it's a first of a kind type of approach to see if we can work as a watershed and look to put the BMP improvements, stormwater improvements, where they would make the most sense to limit our runoff flows and obviously improve the water quality. So that's a project that we're working on right now, but I could envision where we do see projects in certain townships upstream from other townships And it's a partnership approach where everybody works together to try to improve the flow, because obviously municipal boundaries don't follow the watershed boundaries. So those type of approaches we're looking into, and obviously we're an active member of the Wissahickon Clean Water Partnership. So I could see where we do some improvements, or other towns do improvements above us, and we work together to try to solve some of the challenges in stormwater management.
That's really great. Well, thank you. I really appreciate everyone sticking with us today. I think that's all of our questions. Yeah, thank you for all the wonderful participation in this session. And I want to thank all of our presenters as well for sticking around. I think we'll wrap it up now. We're about 20 minutes over. Kelly, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you all. This was so fruitful. And if there isn't any questions that we got to today, we can happily circulate back. And again, this will be recorded and posted on our website to glance over and review as well. Just a reminder that the next session is at 1:30 this afternoon. All of that information is on sketch.com. So thank you all so much. There will be some feedback surveys as well. We would love to hear from you on how we can improve sessions like this and our engagement across the coalition. So thank you all again, and this was wonderful. We hope to see you virtually soon this afternoon.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. Thanks, Jim.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Obi.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Obi. Thank you.
Thank you for sticking around. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. All right.
If you want, we can stick around too and just chat a little bit more. Otherwise,
No, I'm good. I don't want to keep you on too long. Appreciate your help, really. I forgot about all those little transitions in my slides, so I'm sorry about that.
totally fine. All right, I'll end the session. Thanks.
Okay, great. So long.